Sveiki, Žygis, senokai bei rašėm podcast'o serijos taip gyvai, akis į akį. Tai labai smagu, kad mes tai darom tokią iš tiesų ypatingą dieną, kai lygiai prieš metus jūs išrinko į Seimą trečiai kadencijai ir iš tiesų bent jau iš jūsų pusės per šiuos metus jau tikrai labai daug nuveikta. Tai galvojau, gal šiandieną aptarsime plačiau, kas įvyko per šiuos metus. Tai Lietuvoje, tai tarptautinėje erdvėje ir apskritai galbūt rasim tą viduriuką, kaip sakant, tarp Lietuvos politikos ir kaip tai įtakojo mūsų užsienio veidą ir mūsų tarptautinę politiką. Tai Žygi, kaip jūs išskirtumėt, kokius, sakykime, 5 dalykus išskirtumėt per šios pirmus šios kadencijos metus, kas gerai, kas blogai, kas įsimintina ir kur mes einam toliau?
Gal pradėkim nuo Amerikos, nes mūsų tinklalaidė ir prasidėjo nuo tos dramos, kuri prasidėjo Amerikoje. Tai turbūt šie metai yra vieni iš dramatiškiausių pokyčių Vašingtone metai, kuriuos mes turbūt dar tik tai absorbuojam. Realiai Lietuva, galima sakyti, dingo iš Vašingtono, kas yra labai liūdna. Mes esame kongrese, bet mes niekaip nepatekome į Baltuosius rūmus ir tai nebūtinai tik mūsų kaltė, be abejonės, bet kai kurios šalis pateko ir čia galim dėti tokį nei pliusą, nei minusą. Amerika, aišku, grįžta, lyg ir grįžta į tą mūsų senąją politiką, pirmosios sankcijos, kurių taip ilgai laukiame, bet ar jinai neatšoks jau rytoj. Šiuo metu Trumpas Indo tam Pacific regione, ar tai reiškia, kad jisais tais Bideno keliais ir burs visą laisvą pasaulį prieš autokratijas? Nežinia, žiauriai daug darbo reikia padaryti ir mes akivaizdžiai, ypač ši vyriausybė, to nesugeba, nes jos spalvos netokios. Dabar dėl Europos aš dėčiau gan riebų pliusą ir dėl to, kad ten Andrius Kubilius dirba ir gerai dirba ir toj turbūt srity, kur labiausiai mums reikia šiuo metu, tai Briuselis, kaip anksčiau buvo mums svetimas, dabar yra daug labiau su mumis. Vien ir ta greita komisijos reakcija įvardinant tas balionų atakas kaip hibridinės rodo, kad Briuselis yra daug arčiau, netgi, aš sakyčiau, kai kurios mūsų sostinės, kurios vėlgi, su kuriuom irgi nebuvo visom dirbama vienodai. Gal aš taip apibendrinčiau tą Europą, kad realiai dabartinė valdžia judėjo mūsų sukurtais bėgiais Europoje, kurie suveikė, nes, pavyzdžiui, net ir gynybos finansavimas yra didesnis visų pirma dėl to, kad Europa leido skolintis ir dar pridėjo labai daug pinigų iš Kubiliaus tų sukurtų fondų, bet galėjome, aš manau, veikti kūrybingiau. Vokiečiai, aišku, per tą laiką vėl čia riebų pliusą dedam, jie bando vos ne amerikiečius pakeisti ir jų gynybos finansavimas ir galų galia visas NATO 5%, kurie atsirado net ir to paties Trumpo dėka, yra daug. Bet mes neišnaudojam tų galimybių su, aš sakyčiau, kaimynais į regionų. Ir čia aš dėčiau tokį vėl 50/50, o kai kur ir riebesnį minusą. Aš neseniai grįžęs su Laurynu iš tos konferencijos, kurią organizavo opozicinė Lenkų Kačinskio vadovaujama jėga. Jie iškart mums pasiūlė, kaip senais gerais amžinatilsio Kačinskio laikais, sukurti tam tikrą regioninį saugumo formatą. Baltijos šalis, Lenkija, Lietuva. Kam faktiškai priešinasi dabartinė Lietuvos vyriausybė ir taip pat ir dabartinė Lenkijos vyriausybė apie tai nekalba. Jie galvoja, kad juos išgelbės tik Briuselis. Bet jeigu jau vokiečiai stato brigadą, tai kodėl negalėtų kažką panašaus mes sukurti su Lenkais ar su šiaurės šalimis. Tai čia tiesiog matau, jeigu Amerikoje pakritimas ir neaišku, ar mes išlysim iš tos duobės, Europoje lyg ir kilimas į viršų, bet neišnaudotas galimybės.
Absoliučiai.
Ir trečias, aš sakyčiau, tas Indo-Pacifikas, visas platusis laisvas pasaulis, kurį atrado mūsų vyriausybė, visiškai mes plaukiam pasroviu, aš net nematau, ką mes ten darom. ta prasme, mes net nedalyvaujam, mes net neišnaudojam tų galimybių, nors galėtume. Ironiškai paskutinė ministrė, kuri suvokė to Indo-Pacific svarbą, buvo Dovilė Šakalienė ir jos dabar neliks, kiek suprantu, kažkoks trinkelių statytojas greitai bus paskirtas. Pažiūrėsim, aišku, ar taip iš tikrųjų bus, bet tos galimybės, kurios ten sukurtos, yra neišnaudotos. Tai aš sakyčiau, taip, ne 5, bet 3 įvardinčiau, kryptis Amerika, Europa ir visas pasaulis. Mes pradėjom plaukti pasroviui ir tas neramina. Mes reaguojam per vėlai, kaip ir tos pačius balionus, nors norėtųsi tos lyderystės, kuri dar vis jaučiasi, bet jeigu mes toliau nesimsime kažkokių aktyvių priemonių, tai bijau, kad mes vėl eisime į tą atsilikusių ešaloną.
Galų gale norisi, kad mes turėtume valdžią ir atsakingus žmonės, kurie iš tiesų supranta, kas mums grėsia, ko mums reikia ir kad imtųsi iniciatyvos, o ne šiaip savo sėdėtų ant tokio, sakykime, galinio suolelio ir lauktų, kol kažkas pirmas peržengs tą patį Rubikoną. Bet jūsų šiuose 3 įvardintuose, sakykime, momentuose šių metų kažkaip ir jūsų, sakykime, jų apibūdinimuose ir apskritai jūsų tonė aš girdžiu labai daug optimizmo. Ir aš tom tikrai žaviuosi, aš dėja, ne tai, kad nesutinku, bet man yra iš tiesų vis sunkiau ir sunkiau įžvelgti to pozityvo. Amerikoje aš dėja ir atvirai šnekant, bent jau iš mano pusės, aš tikrai nematau nieko gero, aš įtariu, kad šitos naujos sankcijos, yra dėl ko suabejoti, ar jos, ar laiku, ar net per vėlai, ar jos nebus atšauktos, vėlgi, kaip jūs sakote, ant rytdienos. Dėl Europos judam gerą linkme, bet kyla irgi klausimų, ar nebus per vėlu, ar mes ne tai, kad pakelsim tas raumenis, kaip jūs mėgstate sakyti, ne užauginsim jų per vėlai ir ar Rusija nespės padaryti, ar tai žudyti ir okupuoti daugiau Europos prieš mums turint pajėgumus atsispirti ir apsiginti. Tai man čia kyla daug klausimų, bet...
Aš manau, po mūsų kalbės legendinis 45 metus JAV diplomatijoje tarnavęs ambasadorius John Tefftas, kuris mus atvedė į NATO, pamatė tą kylantį Rusijos blogį. Aš galbūt tokio žmogaus akimis kalbu, nes matai, aš tikrai mačiau tos rusiškus tankus prie sausio 13 ir aš dalyvavau, kaip vis dėlto iš tos baisios situacijos visose procesuose Lietuva įsiveržė. Ir dar šiandien tą gražiai pasakė Jonas Omanas susitikime jau visų opozicinių frakcijų dėl reagavimo į balionus. Jūs sako, lietuviai kartais nesuvokėte, kokie jūs esate tobuli. Pas jūs yra, jis tai gražiai įvardino, saugumo vertikalė, kur realiai ir viršui, ir tarp partijų, ir tarp institucijų, ir tarp žmonių yra labai aiškus vienas grėsmės suvokimas. Mes esame stiprus kumštis, kuris greitai gali išspręsti problemas. Didesnės šalis su mažiau vienodų grėsmės suvokimu reaguoja dar lėčiau. Ir nežinau, aš grįžau iš tos pačios Lenkijos. Tiesą pasakius, aš atsimenu savo pirmą kelionę į Lenkiją. Aš važiavau tuo metu mokytis italų kalbos ir kultūros 93 metais. Mes buvome ubagai, palyginus su Lenkais. Žinok, dabar aš su visa pagarba, aš tik neįsiu į detalės, bet lietuviai jau net Lenkijoje jaučiasi geriau. Nekalbu, ar tu, pavyzdžiui, buvai Rumunijoje, ar tu buvai pietinėse valstybėse, mes buvom kartu su tavimi Ispanijoje. Tu matai, kad mes labai gerai išnaudojam tą laiką. 30 metų buvo puikiai išnaudota. Ir todėl aš labai norėčiau, net ir šiandien vėl tam kriziniam susitikime aš pasakiau, kiekviena krizė yra galimybė. Ateina krizė, pavyzdžiui, mes dabar suprantam, kad mes nelabai galim, neturim iki galo visų techninių priemonių kovoti. Ne tik su dronais, bet ir su balionais. Tai įsigykim po velnių. Tai šiandiengi minos ant mūsų galvų dar nieks mūsų nešaudo, nežudo.
Mes turime laiko.
Turim kažkokie balionai, jie sukelia grėsmę, bet dar nežudo. Tai turime laiko pasiruošti. Ukrainiečiai netgi tokio laiko neturėjo dėl visokių politinių priežasčių. Tai man tiesiog norėtųsi, kad Lietuva būtų daug aktyvesnė. Ir ką mes vėl grįžtų į tą patį susitikimą dėl tų balionų, nebūtinai simetrinė, bet asimetrinė priemonėm atsakyti Baltarusijai. Mes esame ES nariai, kuriuos girdi Briuselis. Įveskim sankcijas Baltarusių naftos sektoriui, kuris šeria Putiną, bankams, uždarykime tas sienas, kad tie patys baltarusai negalėtų skraidyti tais pačiais mūsų lėktuvėliais, kuriuos jie gąsdina savo balionais. Juk Vilniaus oro uostas yra ir jų vienintelis oro uostas. Tai uždarykime pilnai, amen, skraidykit su savo ten tais traktoriais, jeigu jie skraido. Skausmą reikia įvesti. Ta užsienio politika nėra tik gynybinis dalykas, tu gali tiek daug tai lietuvėliai mažai sukurti. Tai man norėtųsi to entuzijazmo.
Pertrauksiu, bet jūs kalbat labai teisingai, mums reikia atsakyti, bet mes neatsakom. Ir aš kažkaip kitaip apibūdinti negalėčiau, kaip tik atsirado ne tik vadovybė, bet apskritai, sakykime, Lietuvoje bendrai toks aktingumas. Žmonės ir apskritai institucijos, man toks jausmas susidaro, kad pradeda tingėti, pradeda vėlgi gražiai kalbėti, kad mums reikia kažką padaryti, mums reikia atsakyti, mums reikia nusipirkti dronų, bet dronai neperkami, gynybos lėšos skiriamos trinklelėms pirkti ir tiesti kelius, o ne realiai finansuoti diviziją ir statyti mūsų karinį pajėgumą, mūsų pasieniečiai, vėlgi tų pačių balionų nesugeba visai ir pamatyti, ir nušauti, ir nukenksminti ir panašiai.
Tu teisus, mes dabar esame užsienio reikalų komiteto patalpose. Aš atsimenu, šitose patalpose maždaug 16 metai, tai reiškia prieš 9 metus, panaši situacija buvo su Baltarusija ir tuo metu raudonoji valdžia sureagavo visai kitaip, negu mes jau dabar siūlome reaguoti. Tuo metu Lukašenka vėl paleido visus kalinius, atėjo tuometinis ministras Linas Linkevičius ir pasakė, viskas, reikia susitaikyti su Lukašenka, nuima visas sankcijas. Kuo tai baigėsi, mes žinom. Revoliucija, žmonės sukišti ir toliau visokios hibridinės atakos prieš mus, tiesiogiai Lukašenkos pagalba Putinui kare ir taip toliau. Tai buvo kvailystė. Bet aš manau, dabar tu teisus ta prasme, kad Baltarusai ir tas režimas bando mūsų viduje pažadintą sovietinį nuolankumą. Balionai ir visi kiti daiktai skirti tam, kad lietuvis kristų ant kelių. Tuo labiau, kad Vašingtonas nori su Lukašenka susidraugauti ir atplėšti kabutėse nuo Putino, kas yra absurdas, neįmanoma atplėšti vasalo jau 30 metų grandinėmis prikaustyto prie Maskvos. Tai realiai Lukašenka bando mūsų laužyti ir įjungti tą tokį tipišką sovietinį nuolankumą. Tai gerai, tai ko jūs norit, pasiduodam, atidarom vartelius. Bet aš taip žiūrėdamas į dabartinės reakcijas, yra turbūt tikrai tokių žmonių vyriausybėje, kurie norėtų taip reaguoti, bet jiems jau kažkaip nebepatogu, nes po karo lietuviai rimtai pasikeitė. Mes tapome, beje nepaminėjau, kas per metus įvyko, mes tapome tokių vis labiau panašesnių Izraelių. Ta prasme, mes žiūrime juos, šiandien kalbėjomės, palaukit, dronai. Tai Izraelis turi tokių dronų, iki 13 km pakyla, šaudo bet ką, mato viską, mes net vieno vaizdo nematom, atskirus tarnybos, atskirus vaizdus mato, o jie mato vieną vaizdą, normalios šalis mano vietą ir greitai su mokslininkais, galvos smegenys pas mus tokios. Tai, kad mes tapom labiau izraelitais, kovojančiais už savo gyvybę dantimis, protų, idėjomis, man tas patinka. Ir aš manau, kad dabartiniai raudonieji tiesiog neatliepia to ritmo. Gal juos išrinko kiek panašesni žmonės į juos, bet jiegi buvo apgauti. Jie tikėjosi galbūt tenai tos pensijų fėjos Blinkevičiūtės, kuri tenai viską jiems duos. jie buvo apgauti, gal jie buvo pavargę, dabar jie atsirūksta nuo to savo pasirinkimo, jie mato, kad net neaišku kartais ar valdžia yra Lietuvoje. Tai mes neturime leisti režimams, kad jie taip galvotų.
Taip, būtent.
Mes turime įtikinti ir dabartinę valdžią elgtis teisingai, o ateis laikas, lietuviai pasirinks labiau panašesnius į save negu į tą rusišką raugą, kuris kartais išlenda mūsų vyriausybei.
Tik duok Dieve, kad nebūtų per vėlu. Ir tuom aš labiausiai ir iš tiesų bijau, nes per šitos balionus ir per šitos dažnus oro erdvės pažeidimus ir panašiai, per tas visas provokacijas, sakykime, kur mes kaip, ne tik kaip Lietuva, bet kaip Europa, kaip NATO, neužtektinai adekvačiai sureaguojam. Aš manau, kad tai gali būti tam tikras signalas Maskvai, Minskui, kad mes esam paveikiami, mes galime labai lengvai ir pasiduoti ir leisti jiems pas mus ateiti. Ir aš bijau, kad mes per likusius 3 metus nesugebėsime užtektinai įsidrasint, duoti tą normalų, bauginantį atsaką atgal.
Aš gal išliksiu iki galo optimistas, aš manau, Putinas ir Lukašenka mums padės iki galo. Nepaisant mūsų kvailos, silpnos vyriausybės, aš mačiau reakciją žmonių šiandien aplink stalą, visų partijų, tarnybų, ekspertų. Putinas ir Lukašenka nesupranta vieno. Kaip jis manė, kad ukrainiečius užims per 3 dienas, tai mobilizuoja lietuvius. Jie kartais užmiega ant laurų. Pavyzdžiui, kodėl ten tų dronų mes seniai neįsigijom, nėra aišku. Bet kai jau grėsmė lietuviai, tai palauk. Lietuviai ta prasme yra kaip izraelitai, kad grėsmėje mes tampam titnagu. Ta prasme, aš manau, mes tikrai, net jeigu kažkas aplink Trumpą norėjo atplėšti Lukašenką, apsikabinti ir nuimti visas sankcijas, tai dabar užmirškit. Dabar net ir labiausiai raudoniesiems nepavyks to padaryti, nes joks lietuvis nesupras, kaip galima apsikabinti gyvulį, kuris pradeda įvairiais būdais grėsti mūsų gyvybėms. Sorry, ne. Tai su visom pagarbom visokiems radikalams, kabutėse pagarba radikalams ir čia prašauta.
Titnagas deimantui nelygus, bet turime tikrai ne tik, kad išmokti, bet prisiminti savo šaknis ir užsiauginti vėl šitos spyglius, kad neleistume niekados dar sykį atimti iš mūsų laisvės, demokratijos ir mūsų žemės. Bet toliau šiandienos serijoje mes kalbėsime su labai garbingu ir tikrai net nesugebu apibūdinti, koks fantastiškas svečias bus, bet gal jūs jį labiau pažįstat ir sugebėsite įgarsinti, kas čia per žmogus, kuris 45 metus tarnauja diplomatiniam korpuse, dirba Amerikos ir kaip sakant, by extension, laisvės jėgoms ir apskritai laisvės idealams.
Gal aš taip ir užbaigsiu ir pradėsim pokalbį su Johnu. John Tefftas, kaip ir Dan Friedas, kai kurie kiti amerikiečiai įkūnija tą tikrą laisvės spindesį ir šlovę. Amerika, bent jau man ir iki šiol, ir turbūt liks iki gyvenimo pabaigos, vis tik idealas tam tikro pasaulio, kuris laisvę padaro pagrindiniu savo varikliu visos valstybės ir kovoja su nelaisvė. Ten yra įvairių nuosmukių, bet Tefftas atspindi tą jėgą, kuri kartu su mumis padėjo įveikti visas tas nelaisvės. Jisai ambasadoriavo čia, kai Lietuva buvo, kai sulaukė tų žodžių, kai žmonės su ašarom akyse girdėjo tos žodžius Bušo, kad nuo šiol kiekvienas priešas yra ir Amerikos priešas. Tai jis yra iš tų idealistų. Net jeigu atrodo, kad Amerikoje jų liko mažai, iš tikrųjų tarp žmonių normalių yra nemažai. O dabar tikrai nenorėdamas tau pataikaut, bet net jeigu mes šiandien esam titnagas, tai tokia šeima kaip tavo, kuri sugrįžo į Lietuvą ir toks kaip tu, Kada tu tapsi ministrų pirmininku, tada mes tapsime deimantais, nes tie žmonės sugrįžę iš laisvo pasaulio, patikėję juo, jie yra patys nuostabiausi ir jie, na, tu pažiūrėk, kaip mes vystomės, Vincentai, iš tos 35 metus. Va taip, va beveik, tokia trajektorija, kai tos pačios mano mylimos Italijos ar Ispanijos, na, eina turbūt net žemyn daugiau negu aukštyn. Tai jeigu mes sustabdom rusą, kad ir titnagu, ir mes dar Lietuvoje turim 20-30 metų, tu įsivaizduoji, kokia šita valstybė bus. Bus valstybė, kurioje visi, ne tik lietuviai, nori gyventi.
Už tokią Lietuvą ir toliau kovokime, gero tolimesnio klausimo ir ačiū Jums labai, Žygis.
Ačiū ir tau.
I'm so sorry, John.
No,
Everybody
that's
knows
okay.
you.
That's
With,
all right.
with or without tie, you are Big John, the biggest ambassador in Europe's East. Okay.
Well, it's nice to see you, and it's nice to meet. It's Vincentas? Or
Indeed. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I haven't seen you since I was in Vilnius in September of 23. I came over to the Seimas, I don't know if you remember, and you had kind of an informal meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I tried to answer your questions.
Embassy asked them to meet you, and well, we remember you so well as ambassador. It was during your term we entered NATO.
Yeah.
You've been in Georgia during those most dramatic events. You've been in Moscow when Russia invaded Ukraine. So, okay, all the dramas related with you, more or less. Yeah.
Well, there's people who tease me about that, Žygis, who say, "Jeepers, criminy, don't send Tefft anywhere. Everywhere he goes, something happens." And I said, "Yeah, but it's good stuff too. Look at Lithuania."
Exactly. Okay, so I don't know, Vincentas, would you like to say a few words from the beginning, and we could roll? Maybe, of course, would be great that John, you say a few words about you, because I know, 2-3 decades.
Okay,
about your work.
let's start off a
please.
little bit more structured. I'll give a short introduction, and then Ambassador Tefft, if you could then say your piece, and then we'll slowly move into the questions.
So I have a question. Do you post this video, or do you just do the voice for the podcast?
We tend to do the video unless you'd prefer that we only
that's okay.
Okay,
Because
good.
honestly, kids and young people with whom we also try to explain foreign policy, they watch everything video, and
Yes, exactly. No, I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
I've done it both ways. That's why I was just curious how it goes.
Okay.
All right. Shall we start, guys? All right. So, good afternoon to all of our listeners, and good morning to you, Ambassador Tefft. Before we get started, it's I think my pleasure, and of course an honor as well, to have one of the greatest, most important American ambassadors in Lithuania of our time that was there to see us come into NATO and come into the West, as it were. So before we get started, Ambassador Tefft, if you could give us a short introduction as to who you are and why the new generation and Lithuanians in general should remember you and your works.
Well, thank you very much, Vincentas, and Žygis, thank you for being here and inviting me to do this. It's always great to talk to my Lithuanian friends. I would just say first and foremost that my wife Mariella and I look back on our times in Lithuania, not just from a historic standpoint. And as Žygis said, when I was there, NATO voted to bring Lithuania into NATO. The actual accession came after I left, but we did a lot of important work there, and we did it with Žygis and a lot of other Lithuanian patriots who did something that was very, very important for your country, but I believe also for my country. But in addition to the public role, the little part I played in Lithuanian and American relations and our history of our two countries, I think Mariella and I enjoyed enormously our time in Lithuania, and that's because we traveled everywhere. We were all over and we got to meet a lot of people. I spoke at universities. I visited all the historic sites. I even went to Druskininkai to see the Čiurlionis Museum, which gave me enormous ability to actually talk with Professor Landsbergis about Čiurlionis and musical history, things like that. But we had a really good time with Lithuanians, with people, and meeting them and enjoying our time there, quite apart from the public diplomacy and all of the rest of it. I've been retired now for 7 years. I did 45 years in the Foreign Service, and I'd actually retired first in 2013 after I completed my time as ambassador in Ukraine. It was a difficult period because it was mainly the Yanukovych years, but you know, the undercurrents were already moving when I left in June of 2013, and you know, several months later, as we know, Yanukovych decided not to pursue associate membership in the EU, and the Revolution of Dignity was launched with all of the things that we know about since then. But I had a long career. I started in Jerusalem, of all places, as a junior officer, and Mariella and I were there during the the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. You know, I went through assignments in Hungary during the communist period. I always tease my friends, my hardship assignment came in Rome in 1986, and I was there for 3 years, and it was then you know, I went on eventually to be deputy ambassador in Moscow, and then have 4 different ambassadorships, as Lithuania was the first, Georgia, Ukraine, and then finally Moscow, finishing in 2017. Since 2017, I have been a senior fellow. I now have a fancy title called Distinguished Chair for Security and Diplomacy, or Diplomacy and Security, at RAND. And I do some commentary, and I write a little bit, and I spend a lot of time, though, with my grandchildren. You know, when you get to my age, that means a lot to do that. And so anyway, we're getting ready now for Halloween on Friday, trick or treat, and my wife and I are looking forward to that. Maybe I should stop at that point, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, but that gives you a little bit about kind of who I am and where I am right now in my life. But again, I'll just say I have great respect for Lithuania. My wife and I came back for a visit in September of 2023. I attended the Sakharov Center's conference on Russia and spoke there, and then was able to meet many old friends, and to come over to the Seimas, and Žygis held a meeting with kind of an informal meeting with members of the committee for us to have a nice chat about where things were, or maybe I shouldn't say nice chat, because already by then things were getting pretty dicey, and it was hard. But you know, it was such a great pleasure to see so many friends, but also to see Lithuania and how it developed, and to see the role that Lithuania has now assumed in NATO, in European Union circles, and the leadership role that you have taken. It gives me great pride and satisfaction to see that.
John, before we move to those shattered waters of of current world, can I ask you, like, ambassador to ambassador? You know, I was also ambassador in DC under Obama. Why this link between Lithuanian and Americans? Because when I speak with people like you, I feel so much at home. My first visit to America, I met Damon Wilson. He was then in Washington. Oh my God, I was so relieved, you know, after years in Europe where they didn't get what I think and what I want. I felt at home. You know, the biggest part of our immigration is in America. Like the whole family of Vincentas is from America. Why this strange link? Why this affinity?
Well, I've just completed writing a memoir, Žygis, and the first part of that memoir talks about, the first chapter is about growing up in Madison, Wisconsin. I was born there and raised there, went to school, went to college at Marquette University in Milwaukee. And what I've written in that memoir, I think, is the bottom line, and I've checked this with many of my friends. I think that the people of America have great affection for the Baltic states. And this goes back, for older people like me, into the 50s and 60s. The sense that Russia, Soviet Union, had taken over the Baltic states, and nobody accepted that. The United States didn't accept it officially, but I think even more, ordinary Americans didn't accept it, and I think this has continued. It's the captive nations. I can still remember when I was a kid that people would talk about captive nations. I remember there were rallies even in Wisconsin. And so you had that sense. And it's Americans, the Žygis, because you served here, our country really well. Americans have a great affection for underdogs. It's about the big bad Soviet Empire was persecuting the Baltic countries as well as a lot of others, obviously, and the United States never accepted that officially, which I think was exactly the right position, and which I think I think when I got to Lithuania in 2000, you could see this all the time. People would come up to me and say, "Thank God." You were there. Now we couldn't, obviously, we weren't going to send troops in and fight a war with the Soviet Union, but we never gave up our principled position on this. And I think we've done pretty well since Lithuania reclaimed its independence and became the vibrant nation that it has been. We've tried to be supportive. And, that's gone, if you look back over the last 30, 40 years, you can see that was a bipartisan feeling in the United States. And, I was able during my career as a Foreign Service officer, I worked for Republican and Democratic administrations. And I never found officially, even in the private halls of Washington, that anybody really kind of questioned that. And certainly the American people didn't. Now, I might say, just as an additional point, if you look today at polling in America about the war in Ukraine, you have a massive support for Ukraine. And again, it's that same, I think, fundamental feeling that, the Soviet Empire, the Russian, Vladimir Putin's desire to have a new Russian empire that turns people completely off and brings us to support and sympathize with the peoples of Eastern Europe, who want nothing more than freedom and to live in peace, in independence. Maybe I'll stop at that point.
Well, it's where do I start? Actually, it was very nice to hear actually how much you remember, how fondly you remember my home, Lithuania. And all these great things. And you had mentioned that you had gone back to Lithuania, what was it, in 23?
September 2023, yes.
Right. So, that's obviously quite a long break, let's say, from being in Lithuania. Did you notice anything, especially tied in with the current geopolitical situation? How has Lithuania done since your tenure as ambassador here? Have we gone in the right direction? And maybe if you know about what's going on in Lithuania right now, do you have any recommendations on where to take that direction so we would truly be a nation fighting for and continuing and spreading the fight for freedom and democracy in the region and around the world?
That's a big question, Vincent. So let me just say that I don't follow domestic politics in Lithuania that closely. So what I'm about to say is more big picture. It's we sometimes have this expression, looking down from 33,000 feet rather than down in the down in the weeds, shall we say. I think, I came away from Lithuania, actually wrote a little piece for the Rand Corporation about the success of Lithuania. And, I understand all of the threats and all of the problems that face, I think, Lithuania. And I'm not just talking about geopolitical ones, economic and others that are difficult. But as I look at Lithuania kind of from the big picture over the last 40 years, I think the dreams that Lithuanians had and the dreams that people like me had for this country have been more than fulfilled. Now, I'm sure there's people who will watch this and say, oh, yes, Ambassador, but, and they'll cite a lot of the problems and other things. And I get that. I'm not trying to diminish any of that. What I am trying to say, though, is in the long sweep of history, this is going to be, I think, looked back as a golden period for Lithuania. Now, obviously, a lot of things are threatening out there now, right on your borders, and I get that. But you've got to, I think, from the standpoint of becoming a truly sovereign, independent country, linked to the West through the EU and through NATO, playing a role that, this expression, I think it's British, it's not American, but punching above your weight. In other words, a small country that has an outsized impact on world events and on the region that it's there. I think Lithuania has been phenomenally successful. And, I think everything that I had hoped, and I think everything that President George Bush and others Colin Powell had hoped for Lithuania and the Baltic countries when the decision was made to invite membership to NATO, I think that's been achieved. I think it's tremendous. And people in Lithuania should take great pride in that, even as they try to deal with the problems that you face right now. It's anyway, I hope I've got the balance right here. I don't want to imply that there's not issues. I mean, it's like America. People ask me about my own country, and as you all know, we're going through some big traumatic times back here, politically and economically.
John, let me then push you a bit. Like, maybe not to provoke you, you're ambassador. I can never provoke you, but on NATO, you've been ambassador through the most historic period. When I was watching the Bush speaking, I was more or less crying. Everybody was crying because that was the moment of 50 years. We've been so much waiting for those Americans. 30,000, troops died in the wood learning English, waiting for Americans. And that was the moment Bush said that from this day, every enemy of Lithuania is the enemy of America. And then you came to Vilnius in 23, and you saw us trying to punch above the weight, trying to convince Biden and then German Chancellor to agree with Ukrainian NATO membership. And you remember well, this fight started in Bucharest 2008. And, and here we have the current situation. We have Chancellor Merz coming to Vilnius and, building brigade and saying, from the more or less paraphrasing what Bush said, but on Lithuania, from this day, defense of Vilnius is like defense of Berlin. And today, Germans already support Ukrainian NATO membership. But what shall we do with America for them to believe this, I would say, American dream or dream of NATO expansion and dream of Ukraine joining NATO? Do you think, finally, I know that Americans are always doing the right thing after they use all the alternative. Do you think we will be able to convince American administration to move forward, like you convinced, NATO and America itself to move on Baltic membership in NATO, finally to do it with Ukraine? Because that's like the most existential dream of all Lithuanians. If we do it, my kids, my grandsons, Lithuania will be living for 100 years or more. If not, all the beauty we created with you might be in danger.
Yeah, no, I understand your question. Let me just preface my answer by saying that, I work for the RAND Corporation, and RAND is a nonpartisan group. So I'm not going to try to get into Democrats versus Republicans and the rest of that, but I will try to address the larger issue here. I would start by going back to what I just said. There's huge support that the Baltic countries enjoyed during the post-World War II period, which I think continues today. And then say that I think the support for Ukraine from the American people, if you look at polls over and over again, people support Ukraine in their fight against the Russian aggression that Putin launched really in 2014, but obviously in a much larger fashion in 2022. And you've got that bedrock of support. And if you had any question about that, all you have to do is look at this bill to impose sanctions on Russia, which a bipartisan bill which was introduced by two senators, one Democrat and one Republican, last year, and which now has 80 co-sponsors. So you got 100 senators and 80 of them have supported this bill. So I think this is a fundamental question or a fundamental point that I would argue for the long term. Now, I can't predict exactly what's going to happen in the administration's approach toward the war. I think we've had a very significant change with President Trump's decision to impose these secondary oil sanctions. I was just reading an article in the Washington Post this morning by a fellow who writes for the Hudson Institute, Thomas Dusterberg, and he said this is going to have a significant impact. And he goes through some detail about trying to say how the Turkish companies and the Chinese companies are now not moving ahead with their contracts. And as we all know, the Russian economy is not doing well. The central bank chief, the minister of economy have talked about recession. And his point was, we've got to stick to this. Don't just stop. The administration needs to continue. And he is a little worried that in this meeting with President Xi of China, he doesn't want President Trump to back off of these sanctions against the Chinese, the secondary sanctions against Chinese oil companies, because while that might be something the Chinese want, that's going to hurt the longer struggle and lengthen the struggle in Ukraine. So I think the administration, the president has adopted a more a good approach right now to putting some pressure. I could come up with some other things I'd like to see the administration do, but in terms of giving weapons to Ukraine and the rest of it. But I think the president has spoken out and said that, he understands that that Putin's determined to continue this war, despite all the efforts over the past 8 months to try to get him to stop, including the summit up in Alaska and the rest of it. Putin is determined, and I've written, since I came back from Moscow, I've been making speeches and others saying Putin's all in on this. This is his legacy. This is what he wants to do. He's not going to change. And I think that's been understood in the administration. I'm not sure it was understood by everybody at the very beginning in that. So I guess it's a long way of saying, Žygis, that I think you've got the body politic back here supporting Ukraine and the larger objectives which Lithuania and other members of NATO and the EU support. But you've also got a position right now where the pressure, I think, is going to build as long as we hang in with this policy and continue to try to do it. It's not, this war is I think, as you know very well, is Putin's desire to reassert Russian empire, to take control of Ukraine, to keep NATO out of there. I cannot predict what exactly NATO membership, how that will come out. I mean, that has shifted, as you know, through different administrations here. Even the Biden administration wasn't pursuing it, but there may come a time to do that. I'll finish by saying I saw a chart online yesterday that it was like a map, and it showed the number of forces arrayed between Russia and NATO, and it was if you totaled up all of the NATO countries, it was like 1.3 million men. And 1.3 million something for Russia. Anyway, the interesting part is they included in this Ukrainian forces. Ukrainians have 600,000 military personnel right now. Now, if you put that up, we obviously have technological advantages and things like that, I think, with the Russians, but that's a huge number of people. I could make a good case that Ukraine and NATO is much stronger, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole region. And I think you agree with that. You're a politician, you're a historian, Žygis. You understand that things change only in time. And sometimes you want to do something much faster, and you have to wait till the things move. You know, the old Soviet expression, the correlation of forces has to change. And you know, I don't use it in the Soviet sense, but I think it's moving forward. And you know, I get up every morning and think of all of the Ukrainians who died in this horrible, aggressive struggle, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and all these innocent civilians who get killed these days when these rockets and drones come down in apartment buildings. It's horrible. It's horrific. But I hope that I'll live long enough to see Ukraine be truly independent, to see this war stopped, and to see Ukraine a full member of the Western community.
We will celebrate together, John.
I find it, as I see it as Žygis quite often, I find it very impressive that himself and in this case you, Mr. Tefft, that you guys managed to keep that optimism. And I tend to be far more skeptical. You know, in regards to what you've said with the new sanctions, right? I mean, it sounds good, very good, and it's I mean, maybe too little, too late, but it's good. But on the other hand, you have this in the current administration, this constant wishy-washiness. One day, rhetorical support for Zelensky; the other day, a red carpet in Alaska for Putin, and other similar such stories. This same sanctions package that has been blocked in Congress, or had been blocked in Congress for I don't even know how long, but a rather long time, and it seemed nothing was going right. Can we really be sure that this is, let's see, a complete change in the direction of the wind, or are we just looking at a few drops of kindness to keep us satisfied until the end?
You can't be sure of anything. It's that's just the nature of life. You know, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I was an Irish Catholic family. My grandmother immigrated to the United States from Ireland, and you know, this is a woman who worked every day of her life. Her husband died months after they got married of pneumonia. She raised my mother as a single mother, single child, and she put her through college, put her through high school, put her through college, and you know, here I am, the second generation, and I look back on my life with gratitude. You know, I've had issues in my family, health and otherwise, but you know, fundamentally, it's an amazing story. What's at the root of it is American optimism, you know, and I think part of this is just my roots in Irish Catholic tradition, and part of it is a sense that you have to keep trying. You know, no matter how hard you get put down, all the horrors, all the tragedies that we see in the world today, you got to keep at it. In my one time somebody said, "So are you a realist or an idealist?" You know, the classic difference. And I said, well, you know, I don't think I fall in either group. I said, if I were to call myself something, and labels are dangerous, as every politician like Žygis knows, it's also, you know, I think I would call myself a pragmatic American Midwestern idealist. Now that kind of tries to straddle everything, but I really do believe that unless you have a dream, you know, unless you have a goal and you keep at that goal, you know, life isn't worth living. You got to have you know, I think back to my time, and I worked with President Adamkus, and I worked with Professor Landsbergis, you know, and I still remember, you know, Žygis, you mentioned the day that President Bush gave his speech in Rotuše Square. And I was kind of back a row or two behind when Bush gave the speech, behind the Baltic presidents, and I was standing next to Landsbergis. And he, like so many of us, had tears in his eyes. And I turned and looked at him, and after the speech finished, I looked and I said, "Congratulations." And it was like, he didn't say anything. All he did was look at me, and it was like, yes, we've achieved our dream, but we still had more to do. It was not too long later that I was at the British ambassador's. Bear with me for this story. You'll see where I'm going with it. I was at the British ambassador's National Day reception at the British Embassy north of Vilnius. And that day they honored a Lithuanian who had left during the communist period and gone to Britain and became a fighter pilot, and who had died fighting for Britain and for the West against the Nazis. And they had discovered, I think they'd got, I don't know if they ever discovered the body, but the British decided to award him several medals. I don't know if you were there that day, Žygis, but they had this ceremony and they gave the medals to the family, as a farming family from northern Lithuania. And then the British had brought in 3 of their Harrier jump jets, and they did a missing flyer formation right over the embassy, which is the 3 planes came in like a V, and then one veered off. It's in honor of the person there. And Professor Landsbergis always used to like to tease me. I think that's part of his shtick. Anyway, he leans over to me because we were standing together at that too, and he said, "Well, look what the British have done. When are you getting the F-16s in here to do this, Tefft?" And so I laughed, of course, but he always understood. He had the dream, but he always understood that you had to follow through and you had to keep at it. You had to not stop. There was no kind of end moment. So what I would say to young people like you, Vincentas, is don't lose faith. I know it's easier for old guys like me to look back and say, oh, in the sweep of history, Lithuania should be happy, because you guys have got to grow up and live and face all of these threats and challenges and tragedies that exist in Eastern Europe right now. And you've got a tough neighborhood. There's no question. But I think the future is there, and you should be proud of what your country has achieved. And I mean that quite sincerely, and I mean it also quite realistically. So anyway, I'll stop at that point. There, you get a little bit of the unvarnished John Tefft philosophy.
I'm into that.
Can I ask a last difficult question? And that's really, behind I have Reagan, the post I got from Congress, from Barry Jackson, who was then chief of the cabinet of Speaker Johnson. And I love that man. I read books about Reagan and his cooperation with Catholic John Paul II, all this, great union against communism. And it's kind of difficult for me to understand how this nation that I will love and appreciate so much, we love American dream, why with each president, they go into this strange crash course on Russia, learning that, accommodation leads to appeasement and to final defeat. With every president, with all the think tanks, with all John Teffts, with Rands, with intelligence that is #1 in the world, why do they always appease for some period of time dictators? Now we have a little problem with them appeasing Lukashenko, calling Lukashenko, promising visits, trying to repeal Lukashenko from Putin. Really, he's in his pocket for 30 years. It is a joke. All Lithuanian presidents tried it and failed. Why America always goes for this crash course of autocracies? Why?
I don't have a really good answer for your question. I have the same question myself sometimes, Žygis. I think part of it, I think the American people often stay pretty solid, and that's what I was trying to say a little bit earlier. But I think every administration comes and tries to solve problems. We're a nation of problem solvers, and sometimes problems can't be solved, or they certainly can't be solved in your time frame. But you have in a political system, in a democracy, you have the pressure to show. In the age of social media, it's there every day. Show us what you've done. You failed today. You succeeded yesterday. What will you do tomorrow? It's a little bit, it's always been there, but I think it's exacerbated now, put it that way. I try to, as we say, stay above the fray. To try, I have very strong views on different things, but I try to keep an overview of the changes and the things that are doing. For example, I give enormous credit to the Ukrainian people for their resilience and fight against the Russian Empire. And I was there for 3.5 years, and I saw. I remember. I often think of going out to the technical university and seeing the rector out there, who I thought was a great man, and he was already sending his students to Stanford and to MIT, Caltech, to places. And I suspect some of these guys are now the ones out there starting these companies and running these companies with drones and doing other great high-tech stuff. But it was an investment in time. And this was, of course, 2009 to 13 when I saw them. And he'd been doing this stuff for years. These are a very smart, very resilient people who've been faced with an enormous, horrible attack by Russia, and yet they keep at it. A good friend of mine was just in Ukraine and went to see people, and he said, you cannot underestimate the spirit and the resilience of these people. You go there, I know, so you know this as well or better than I do. But I think that there's a hope. Anyway, back to the American side, we try to solve problems. And, sometimes we just you can't do it. And there have been times when I've had to say to senior political leaders when I was ambassador in one of these countries, the time's not right. We can't do this right now. Well, that unfortunately isn't the answer they want to hear, because they've only got 4 years, 8 years in an administration to get something done, to make their mark. And so I think that's it's like the system sets it up in some ways as well. But I always come back to the bottom line on American people. And this may sound I look at polls, obviously. I try to base my judgments on as much empirical data as I can, but it's also a field. I'm a Midwestern guy, and I've always been that way. It's one of the reasons I think I got along so well with people in Lithuania. I grew up and went to school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so I was right at home with all of the beer drinkers in Lithuania. Vigaudas Ušackas, who was the deputy minister and then ambassador to the States, I think he gave me a couple glasses of Švyturys for Švyturys beer. And anyway, I'd already been to Utena, and had plenty of Utenos and Kalnopolis beers. And I know there's lots of craft beers. I was at one place when I was there in 2023. Anyway, I don't make too much of this, but there's a certain connection, and it's not just beer; it's a lot of other things like that tied us in to Lithuania. So I remain hopeful. I remain optimistic despite everything, and but realistic, pragmatic. In the end, sometimes you just have to realize that your strategy wasn't working. I think that's what, in part, as I understand it, what President Trump has understood about Putin. He said, in effect, that he's been played by Putin, and now he's gone ahead and put some serious sanctions on them. And so we'll just have to see how that goes. But if young people are listening to this, to you, Vincentas, I would just say, don't give up, don't quit, keep plugging, and be proud of what your country has done, what your country is doing, and what your country will do in the future for your country, but also for Europe and the Western world.
Thank you for those inspiring words, Ambassador. It means a lot. And we will try to keep up the legacy of revolutionaries like Žygis, and to keep the freedom and to keep the peace.
That's good. Well, I wish you all the best, and I look forward to my next trip. I don't know when it will be to Lithuania, but it's a country that my wife and I both love.
John, maybe next year we will try to organize some conference on Free North, new kind of lexicon of Trump administration, trying to connect Free North with Indo-Pacific, maybe in Lithuania. But I will invite you because I might organize it. It would be great if you come.
Well, I'd be happy to. I would just say to you, there was a point in Washington where I was the director of the Northern Europe office. And so I've had a lot of experience with the Nordics, and one of the proudest things I've in the last couple of years is to see Finland and Sweden make the decision to join NATO, because I think we're all safer and better off with them within NATO than they were outside, even though they were very carefully coordinated with us, as you know. So I'd be happy to do that. It's Lithuania and the Baltics are stronger because of the decisions that the Finns and the Swedes have made and the support that they give you.
Thank you again, John, for everything you did through all those years of your career, not only for Lithuania, for millions of those Europeans who are fighting for American dream. Actually, in this region, the fight is still continuing. I am optimistic that we will end it well. I don't think that this is sustainable for Russian Empire to have the world like war with all democracies. We are much richer, much wiser, we are much more experienced, but we still have to accomplish the mission. Freedom is still not free, but for this we need Americans. We are getting Europe to be a bit more America, to arm itself, but we need still you there. We need American troops in the Baltics. We need American little military assistance. That even if this is symbolic, but we are still trying to convince current administration to keep a footprint in the Baltics, because together we can make this world much better, and it's worth to fight. And really thank you, John, for inspiring us for that fight and for this leadership.
Well, thank you. Good luck to you and to all my the friends who may listen to this, who I don't see. The best to you all, but keep up the fighting spirit and do your best, Žygis. And Vincentas, bring that next generation of Lithuanians along. Follow the steps of your fathers and grandfathers, and Lithuania will be free and be a key part of the entire Western world.
Amen. Once again, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Take care. Good luck to everybody. Bye-bye.
Tikiuosi jums ši serija patiko. Man tikrai patiko ir žinau, kad mėgstu kartais pažaisti ir pavaidinti ciniko ir pesimisto vaidmenį, bet tikrai šiandienos pokalbis su ambasadoriumi Teftu kažkiek man priminė ir įrodė taip pat, kad vis dar kažkur, gal giliai tautos pasąmonėje, gal kitur, bet Amerika dar vis yra. Gal dabar nedaro būtinai visko, ką mes norėtume pamatyti, bet dar vis ta Amerika, kuri mums padėjo iškovoti mūsų laisvę, kuri padėjo kitoms tautoms kovoti už laisvę, už demokratiją, už teisę apskritai egzistuoti, laisviems nuo priespaudos, nuo prievartos ir nuo naikinimo. Tai siūlyčiau iš šitos serijos išsinešti tokią žinutę. Vėlgi, labai tikiuosi, kad serija jums patiko. Tikrai galite įsijungti į mūsų diskusijas, į mūsų diskursą, komentuodami, prenumeruodami, užduodant mums klausimus komentaruose. Tad iki kito karto.